Good morning. It's nice to see everybody on this beautiful Sunday morning. Welcome to First Unitarian Church. We're delighted to have you. I'm Patty Kelly, and I will be serving as your worship leader this morning. Our church is a place where you can be free to be you, and our kids can be free to be them. So bring your questioning mind, your expansive heart, your entire self to this beloved community. Our mission is to welcome all with love, to support learning and spiritual growth, to serve our wider community, and to work for justice, equity, and inclusion. Please make sure to read your announcements and the inserts in today's order of service. Especially if you're new here, we want you to see all the different accommodations we have to make you feel especially comfortable. And you can also learn about our upcoming events. I do have a few announcements. First of all, you can probably see that our wonderful pianist this morning is not Jara Cox. It is Noriko Matsui. And we welcome her wonderful talents and thank her for being with us today. The flowers today are given by Ray Sinclair in honor of his parents, Ginny and Dick Sinclair, who served Ohio churches for more than 40 years. We are delighted that next weekend we will have two special events featuring folk musicians Reggie Harris and Greg Greenway. The first event will be a musical and storytelling event entitled Deeper Than the Skin, a musical presentation on race, hosted by St. John's UU Church on Saturday, this Saturday, May 4th at 3 p.m. The second event is an all-Cincinnati UU worship service, so all the churches are coming here next Sunday, May 5th. Please note that this service starts at 10:30, not 10 o'clock. Next Sunday's service is at 10:30. We strongly encourage you to attend both of these events. And just a couple housekeeping things. Coffee hour today will be in the art wall area right here outside the sanctuary because the estate planning workshop and luncheon will be in the Ellen Hall room. Now, before we begin our service, let's wave to the people at home, say hi, glad you're joining us on Zoom, and then rise for a moment and say hi to your neighbors. I'll call you back with the singing bowl. Talkative. All right. We'll have plenty of time to talk in coffee hour, so we are going to start our service, and the Schaefer family is going to help us with another extra helper, are going to help us light the chalice this morning, while I share with you a poem from Mary Oliver, called mindful. Every day I see or I hear something that more or less kills me with delight, that leaves me like a needle in the haystack of light. It is what I was born for, to look, to listen, to lose myself inside this soft world, to instruct myself over and over in joy and acclamation. Nor am I talking about the exceptional, the fearful, the dreadful, the very extravagant, but of the ordinary, the common, the very drab, the daily presentations. Oh, good scholar, I say to myself, how can you help but grow wise with such teachings as these? The untrimmable light of the world, the ocean's shine, the prayers that are made out of grass. Our first hymn this morning is number 298, Wake Now My Senses, in the gray hymnal. Please rise as you are able and join us in singing. Our message for all ages this morning is a short story that Nancy Sawyer is going to share with us. And afterwards, we will sing the children to their classes with Go Now in Peace.
Good morning. My name is Nancy, and I have a very short story for you today. There once was a dog. It lived, it died, the end. That's our story for today. Noriko?
Is that it?
Okay, Noriko, I think there's more to the story than this. So the longer version of this story is that when my daughter Claire was about your age, oftentimes at bedtime, we read a book. And some nights, I would just make up a story out of my head. And it was a weeknight, and I had had a very long day at work, and I was very tired. And Claire wanted a story, and I said no. But she begged and begged and begged, and so finally I said, okay, I'll tell the story. And I told the story. There once was a dog. It lived, it died, the end. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and we started laughing and laughing and laughing. And we'd stop laughing, and we'd start laughing again. And this went on about for 5 or 10 minutes. Finally, she went to bed, I went to bed. And I got up the next morning, and I was in the car, and I was on my way to work like adults do. And I thought to myself, you know, that story was captured sort of everything and it sort of captured nothing at all. And the thing is, you, right now, and your parents, and everybody in this room, and the people online that are watching us, we are all in the middle of that story right now as we speak. And where are we? We're at church. And there are a lot of people in church right now as we speak. Now, I know that you may have come today because your parents brought you, or you may have come so much that you want to be here because you want to see your friends and you like the stories that you learn in class about how to be a good person and how to treat the earth with love and respect. But have you ever wondered why your parents come to church? Why do your parents come to church? Well, let me tell you, your parents come to church for the same reasons that you come to church. Because no matter how long we have lived, we still need to hear those stories about how to be a good person and how to treat the earth and other people with love and respect. Because, you know, we learn the stories and we forget the stories, and we need to learn them again over and over again. And your parents and everybody sitting in this room, we also need friends, because sometimes being an adult is hard, and sometimes we need friends to get us through those hard times. Maybe we have a problem that we don't know what to do about, and we need friends to help us, or maybe we're just sad, and we need somebody to help us out. Here's my little secret. My favorite part of church when I was growing up are potlucks. Best part of church. So my wish for you is that when you grow up and you're an adult, just like everybody else sitting out here, that you find another church that will provide you with the stories and the lessons and the friends that you need as you go through life. And that's the end of the longer story. Now we'll sing them out.
Can we? Oh, there we go. Loud enough. So, might even be a tad too loud. Is it a tad too loud? If I get on a roll, it'll be really too loud, which might happen today. So, our student intern ended her time with us on Wednesday. So, Natalia was great. And the baton has been passed on, which is why there are a couple of mistakes in the order of service that I created this week. Patty pointed out that I failed to get Noriko's name in the order of service. Apologies. Always love having you play with us. The other thing is we have a responsive reading, which I also didn't insert in the order of service because it was a late edition. We have slides for it, but I'm not sure where I need to stand to be able to read it. So if we could throw it up and I could find out where I need to stand to be able to read. Oh, there it is. Do y'all mind looking at the back of my head while I lead us in this? All right, if you would join me. The religious life is both a spiritual quest and an ethical commitment. As a spiritual quest, we seek to realize our best selves, holding unconditional love as our highest aspiration. As an ethical commitment, we seek to express unconditional love through radical inclusivity, accepting all people into this beloved community, regardless of whatever differences the world may recognize, and in light of the common humanity that unites us. Everybody, being ever mindful of these ideals, the living tradition of our Unitarian Universalist faith becomes a beacon to the world. So from time to time, I reference the Christian House of Prayer, Brother George, Sister Carol, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story again today. Most of you were here when I told the story about Sister Carol and her hymn singing. In a nutshell, people weren't real fond of her voice. And when she sang with spirit. And one day the congregation found her in a particularly spiritual mood and couldn't help but laugh at her singing that Sunday. And she stopped the piano playing, she played the piano, and she turned around and she looked at the congregation and said, God gave me this voice, and if it's good enough for God, it's good enough for y'all. Right? Amen. And so from time to time I'll say to you, let's sing in the spirit of Sister Carol. Meaning, don't worry about who's here. Pretend you're at home in the shower and belt out the hymn. But whenever I say that, I've noticed it don't happen. Y'all sing like my dead Uncle Fred. We got to sing more like Sister Carol. These hymns are beautiful hymns full of hope and inspiration and solace and community. And we should sing them like they matter to us. And so I was thinking a couple weeks ago, we were singing one of these hymns where I thought, this don't sound like Sister Carol to me, and this is a beautiful hymn to sing like Sister Carol. So I warned you, cautioned you, asked you how you'd feel about a couple of tambourines. So even though I forgot to put Noriko's name in the order of service and the responsive reading in the order of service, I did not forget to go on Amazon and order a couple of tambourines. All we need out of the 80 folks who are here this morning, or however many of us we got, are two of you who can keep a beat. I can't. If I play the tambourine to this song, I'll mess up y'all and Noriko, and it won't happen. Who can keep a beat? Come on now.
We'll try.
We're gonna warm up. It's a learning curve, folks. Who else can keep a beat? I'm staring at the drummer, but he ain't raising his hand, so I'm going to pass him by. Your hand went up? All right. If you all would, turn to our next hymn, which is number 131, Love Will Guide Us, and stand as you are able. I like that. Did y'all like that? Did that help? A little more energy. A little more energy. Woo. All right. The title of this morning's sermon is Worlds in Collusion. Somebody said to me some time ago, you come up with some very interesting sermon titles from time to time. Who calls a sermon on religious education Toxoplasma gondii and the Audacious Mouse? That's such a tongue twister, it's not even memorable, is it? But I do have fun coming up with sermon titles, and this is a play off Worlds in Collision, which is a phrase we've all heard. I call it Worlds in Collusion. And hopefully this will be a memorable title, and hopefully you'll find the direction I'm going in this sermon helpful. But I need you to help me get it going. Let's just have you for like 90 seconds share with me what you think are the admirable character traits or virtues we ought to have. Or another way to think about this, if you're raising children or if you've raised children, what character traits or virtues would you like to have seen your children have as they've grown into adulthood? Just throw them out, shout them out. Compassion, honesty, responsibility, tolerance, patience, generosity, authenticity, humility, courage, humanity, love. Took a while, but we got there. Radical inclusivity. Curiosity. Nap time. My biological clock winds down about 2:30 every afternoon. So, that wasn't hard to do, was it? It is not hard to name the character traits or / virtues, whatever we choose to call them, that we think are important to being a human being. And all these wonderful character traits roll off the tongue easily. And they're character traits we ourselves would like to possess. And maybe even more than wanting to possess them ourselves, we would like the scoundrels in our lives to possess these character traits, right? Because if they did, they wouldn't be such scoundrels. They'd be more like us. Congratulations to you if you got that. That was a joke, right? Look, we do better with the scoundrels who are like us than the ones who aren't, but the reality is our scoundrelness is no better than anybody else's scoundrelness, right? Amen? Amen. All right. We are all equal scoundrels in the eyes of God. So I find it interesting that it's so easy for us to name the virtues we would like to possess and that we would like other people to possess. But when I watch people in relationship with each other, I notice something very interesting. That these virtues that we profess we would like to possess and we would like the scoundrels in our lives to possess don't tend to be the way we relate with each other fairly often. Fairly often, the way we relate to each other is quite the opposite. Is it not? I'm paying attention to your Facebook posts. I'm paying attention to your coffee hour chat. I'm paying attention. Now, I'm not trying to come down too hard on you because it is hard to remember to come from the best that is within us. So quite often we don't, especially when the rubber hits the road and we encounter a scoundrel we struggle with, right? Let's be honest about that, okay? So what I notice is that we tend to default fairly often to being avoidant with each other. We tend to be dishonest with each other. We can be defensive with each other. We can be accusative with each other. And sometimes we can be downright manipulative with each other. Do you ever behave that way? Do you ever withhold information from someone because you think you got a good reason not to share that information? Maybe they don't deserve it. Maybe you're afraid of how they'll react to it. Maybe whatever. And when you withhold information, what are you doing? You're manipulating somebody's perception. Or do you ever just tell a little lie? Little lies aren't as bad as the big ones, right? Do you ever tell a little lie just to make the moment easier when you're talking with somebody? Maybe even just to adhere to standards of social nicety? Sure, we lie to each other. And we get defensive when people probe at us rather than just honestly talking about who we think we are in the world. So these are traits that we often bring to bear in our interpersonal relationships, I've noticed. These get foregrounded far too often, and we background those wonderful virtues that roll off the tongue so easily far too often. So this begs a question in my mind. If we have all these wonderful traits that we ourselves would like to possess, and we would like the scoundrels in our lives to possess, why don't we behave in relationship with one another far more often in ways that encourages and rewards those traits, those virtues? Why do we tend to default to the negative ways of being in relationship with each other? Why are we avoidant with each other? Why are we dishonest with each other? Why are we defensive? Why are we accusative? Why are we manipulative with each other? I wonder about this quite a bit as I watch human interactions that we have with one another. And I think it's normal, or at least it has become normal, to be this way. It is our default position. So as I think about, how do I talk about this with the congregation? It could be any congregation. It could be any set of human beings. It's a ubiquitous trait that we all suffer from. And I think the reason we operate this way is because we have what philosophers and psychologists would call a social contract with each other. And the social contract is just like these implicit, unspoken rules that we have learned to apply as we relate to each other in society. We have a social contract with each other. And I think that social contract is designed to prevent the cultivation of those virtues we profess we want to exhibit. I think our social contract is designed to prevent those virtues we want to exhibit with each other. So, what is the social contract that we all adhere to? So this is my speculative thesis this morning, but I think I'm close to being on about this. Do not give information or do not respond to information in a way that's going to make someone else uncomfortable. I think that's a big piece of our social contract with each other. And it's why we behave in the ways we do with each other, despite the virtues we profess we want to exhibit with each other. Do not give information or respond to information in a way that is going to make someone else uncomfortable. Does that sound right? Aren't we overly sensitive in this regard? And I think that explains why we collude with each other, hence the title of the sermon, Worlds in Collusion. We collude with one another to be avoidant, to be dishonest, defensive, right? Accusative sometimes and manipulative. Because these negative strategies are the means we know to prevent each other from actually being uncomfortable with each other. This is how we abide by our social contract. So I think the social contract keeps us locked in a loop of negative interpersonal dynamics. And I think I threw out here just a couple months after my arrival, which I realized was pretty brash given that you didn't know me, and a few of you oohed when I said it. But, I have these little insights that I turn into mantras in my life, and I repeat them from time to time. And the little insight that was the mantra I threw out just 2-3 months after I arrived, I said, relationships are mutually compatible dysfunctions. I don't know if any of you remember that. If you do, I'm very impressed that you pay that much attention. Relationships are mutually compatible dysfunctions. And that's what I'm talking about here. The fact that the way we're in relationship with each other is dysfunctional because of the social contract to which we adhere, but we all adhere to it. So our dysfunction is mutually compatible. But I don't think this is the best way to be in relationship with each other. And I'm certain it is not the means by which we build beloved community. So there you have it, about a third of the way through. The sermon is another prescription for building beloved community. Because as you remember, as your developmental minister, that's one of the things you've charged me to do. So I want to talk about how we move forward in a different way. If we want to have meaningful relationships with one another, we have to create a new social contract. We have to create a new social contract, different than the one we abide by. A new social contract that is far more constructive and meaningful and positive in our lives. We need a conscious social contract that encourages and rewards the character traits we profess we'd like to see in ourselves and the scoundrels in our lives. Yeah? Doesn't that make some sense? Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound like a better way to be in relationship with each other? A social contract that encourages and rewards the character traits we profess we would like to see in ourselves and the scoundrels in our lives. So relationships in which instead of being dishonest, we could really be honest. Instead of being defensive, we could be vulnerable. Instead of being avoidant, we could be direct. How's that feel? Does it feel good? That's how I try to operate in my life. I try very hard to operate that way in my life. And most of the time, I manage to do that. The people who know me really well know that the most important thing about me is my personal integrity. Almost nothing else matters to me as much as my personal integrity. I think the only thing that matters more is the fact that I love you. But close on the heels of that, my personal integrity. So I try to operate with those virtues all the time. One aspect of that is I am always honest. Haven't been my whole life, but somewhere in my early 30s, I realized when you're not honest with people, and you're not honest with you, there's a lot of psychological work that goes into covering your tracks, right? And so I decided, I can now say early in my adulthood, because I'm 60 now, so that's almost half a life ago, that I was through being dishonest. And I have never once had a dishonest moment since then. I did a sermon along these lines about being a parent and how we relate to our children in my previous congregation. And I had the audacity to say in that sermon, I have never lied to my son. Everybody laughed. everybody, like it was an uproarious laugh. And I'm like, that's kind of my point, parents. You all lie to your children. So you colluded this morning to get to church on time. All right, we'll let that one go. Because that one's really important. You can collude for that one. So we lie to our children because it's so much easier just to say what we think they need to hear in the moment. And then as they become teenagers and they start lying to us, we kind of get out the moral yardstick and measure them up a bit, don't we? It's like, you should know better than to lie, says the person who's been teaching lying for 15 years, right? So I said to my congregation, I never lie, and there was uproarious laughter. And it's true. I have never lied to my son, ever. No matter what he asks me, I tell him the truth. And it's a lot more work to do that, because you got to figure out how to do that in a way that preserves relationships. But that's how important my integrity is to me. So here's another example. I told this story again, different sermon, same congregation. And I thought, if I tell this story in the context of the sermon I was doing, they would certainly understand it. And it would make my point, and it would be a meaningful sermon. I'm pretty sure I was clear about why I was telling this story, but apparently it did not make my point, and I never lived it down. So I'm going to try it again with y'all. All right? So talk about integrity and being honest. So my wife is somebody who loves to cook. And she's got some food allergies, so she cooks a lot because she's got so many food allergies that I'm never entirely sure that I'm not feeding her something that is going to make her sick. I mean, I do cook on occasion, but it's very basic if I cook, just to be safe. But she likes to cook, and she likes to experiment to cook. And so one evening at the dinner table with my wife and my son and me, she had tried a new recipe. And in the middle of the dinner, she said, well, so it's a new recipe? And we're like, my son and I are two peas in a pod. We look at each other like, yeah, we know. Well, what do you think? And I thought, oh. I said, as I often say to people, when I'm not sure they want to know what I think, I said, you remember who you're talking to? She said, yes. What do you think? I said, do you want a paragraph? Do you want a letter grade? Do you want a number? What do you want? Give me a letter grade. B minus. B minus. Yeah, I'm not wild about that, and I'm not wild about that. And she got this hurt look on her face. And I said, you asked what I think. And out of respect to you, I'm telling you what I think. So it's a B minus. Now, here's why that's important to me, even though it might be hard for somebody to hear what we say to them. First of all, and least important, if I say, I love it, honey, I'm eating a B minus meal twice a week the rest of my life. Right? Think about that for a minute. Let that in. People take what you say at face value most of the time. All right? So if you're not honest with them, you've locked yourself into a dynamic. Right? But why is that important? Here's the real reason it's important to keep your integrity at all times. And right now, we're just talking about dinner, right? This is low-hanging fruit. This is dinner, right? So here's the thing. My wife spent probably an hour and a half in the kitchen cooking that meal because she loves her family and she loves to cook, and she wants us to enjoy the meal, right? Otherwise, she wouldn't ask, what do you think? So when she says, what do you think of the meal? I presume she's asking for real information because it's important to her what we think of the meal. She wants us to enjoy it. And if I don't give her feedback about the meal, I am robbing her of the very information she's seeking by asking me the question. Why would we do that to somebody? So I answer the question that's being asked because I take the question at face value and I think the information's important. So no matter what you ask me about, dinner, a committee meeting, a relationship you have, I'm going to tell you the truth of my perspective. And sometimes there'll be a prelude that says, you do remember who you're asking, right? And half the time when I say that to people, I'm not exaggerating, about half the time they're like, never mind. Because what they're really asking me to do is confirm the point of view that they already have embedded in the question they're asking. And when I say you remember who you're asking, then they realize what they've done, and sometimes they withdraw the question. So, if we withhold information from somebody who's asking us a question because we don't think they'll like the response we give, that's profoundly patronizing to the other person. Who am I to withhold information to control somebody else's psyche when they've asked me a question? I need to respect the free agency of that person and believe that they're an autonomous individual who can manage their own psyches, and if they ask a question, it's because they wanted to. And if I take it upon myself to withhold information or be dishonest or whatever in order to protect what I think might be a difficult response they might have, I'm managing their psyche for them. That's profoundly patronizing. You don't want me to do that with you, do you? You don't want me to manage your psyche, do you? That wouldn't feel good. We do it all the time. But now that I've named it, you're not going to like it so much next time it happens to you, right? We owe it to each other to act with integrity and honesty and compassion and directness and all those virtues that we profess. So does that new conscious social contract sound good to you now? All right, let's pick some higher hanging fruit. Here at First U, we like to have neighborhood gatherings. So imagine yourself at the next neighborhood gathering where you've got 8 or 10 people sitting around a large dinner table that some wonderful person decided they're going to host for us. And it's a potluck. And somebody brings a meal, and as sometimes happens, not so good, right? None of us, we're not all great cooks all the time, right? And that person says to the table, "What do you think of the pasta dish I made?" How's that new conscious social contract feeling to you now? You're going to be honest? You're going to be direct? You're at work and you're talking to your boss, and the boss asks you a question, and you're pretty darn sure my boss is not going to like my answer. How's that new conscious social contract feeling to you now? Are you having a conversation with your spouse? And from time to time, you got to have delicate, difficult conversations with your spouse. How's that new social contract feeling to you now? This is hard stuff, isn't it? This is hard stuff. And as hard as it feels when I just throw those out there in the abstract, it tells you how much we are embedded to the way we collude with each other based on the social contract by which we currently operate with all those negative tendencies. So, here's the thing. I think that if we're going to build beloved community, we need to have a conscious social contract with each other. Because the social contract we operate by out in the world is not the mechanism for beloved community. It's just not. So people come to church and it's like, church ought to be different. It's church, for crying out loud. Well, yeah, it ought to be different. But if we're carrying all those habits that we have in our daily lives out there in the world into the sanctuary with us, it's going to feel just like it does the rest of the time we're out in the world living our daily lives. We've got to do it differently here. Got to do it differently here. So we need to be conscious about a new social contract. And in order for that to work, I think two things are necessary. One, love must be our modus operandi. It's got to be the way we operate in the world. Now, we all say, yes, love must be our modus operandi, with mental affirmation of the idea. But love is your modus operandi as a subjective, lived, embodied expression of who you are. That's different than the abstract notion of love that we carry around in our heads. So the first cut at having a conscious social contract is a deep, deep commitment to act from love, first and foremost. We must hold each other in the larger context of the love in which we want relationships to take place. You know why relationships fail? There are different iterations on relationships. Boy, am I going off today. There are different iterations on problems in relationships, but they all boil down to this. Relationships fail because the dysfunctions that we encounter in them become larger than the love in which they're supposed to be taking place. Anytime our problems become more dominant than the love that is supposed to be the basis of our relationship with each other, we are in trouble. No matter what particular iteration you're challenged with in whatever relationship you're struggling with at that point in time. Love must be our modus operandi. Collusion, playing by the established rules of the game, despite the dysfunction, is safe. Love as the modus operandi is risky and vulnerable. And two, we lack the interpersonal skills necessary to express ourselves according to the virtues and traits that so easily roll off the tongue. It is presumed in life that as we go through life, we will learn the interpersonal skills necessary to be in healthy relationship with one another. Parents try this, but as we know, they collude to lie to their children all the time. So even parents aren't always great at it. I'm not knocking you, but I know you can handle it, so I'm picking on you. Because I could say that to any parent in this room, and it'd be true. There you go. All right. See, that's the danger. You get to know the minister too well, you become a target on Sunday morning in front of everybody, right? So we lack the interpersonal skills we need to relate to each other in accordance with the virtues we profess. Who teaches these skills in our culture? Maybe parents. But parents are so absorbed in the collusion that defines the negative way we tend to be with everybody that they're not the best teachers themselves. Where do we learn the skill sets? How do we learn to react to somebody honestly when it's easier to be dishonest? How do we learn to stay engaged when it's easier just to avoid? How do we learn to be direct instead of manipulative when manipulation would be the easier path to manage at the moment? We're not taught this, are we? If you've been taught it, You've had a rare experience. So we need to learn the skill sets. Some of you may remember I'm almost done. Some of you may remember the 3 workshops I did in the fall. And I combined Enneagram with action science for those of you who were there. If you weren't, it's recorded on YouTube. Send me a note. I'll send you a link. But one of the things about action science, it's a communication theory about how to communicate well with people. I came up with a mantra when I was taking that class. And the mantra is this. This is a skill set, okay? When we're talking to people, we make a lot of assumptions and attributions about what they're saying to us. They may say X to you, and so I assume that means A. They may do Y, and I assume they did Y because of B. Like, we make assumptions and attributions about each other's statements and behaviors all the time, and presume them to be true, and tell ourselves we understand the individual. And fail to recognize, this is a skill set, that most of our assumptions and attributions are wrong about other people, or at least not totally right. So what does that mean? Well, to be in a meaningful relationship, instead of making assumptions, we need to learn to inquire of other individuals about what they really meant, instead of assume we understood. We need to learn to inquire of other individuals about their real intent instead of attributing an intent to them that may be false. So there's a mantra for you to take home if you need a skill set. Don't assume, inquire. Don't attribute, inquire. And all that's required to do this is a genuine curiosity about the individual with whom you are engaged in the moment, a genuine curiosity. We don't inquire thinking we already know the answer. We inquire because we know we may not, and we really want to know. Okay? That's a skill set. Who teaches that? My God, I had to get into my 3rd postgraduate degree program to learn that. We don't teach this stuff. So, all right, let me get to wrapping up here. If we want to operate from a conscious social contract that encourages and rewards the character traits we profess we'd like to see in ourselves and the scoundrels in our lives, it must begin with the remembrance. It's a big word for me, almost as big as scoundrel. Remember the sermon a month ago? Trying to remember to remember. With the remembrance that love is the larger context in which our relationships must take place. Conscious social contract must begin with that. We have to remember love. We have to remember love. We have to remember love. Okay? And we have to learn skill sets that are necessary to express ourselves in an honest and not threatening way with each other. I've been working on that this year. I did my sermon back in the fall on narratives and perspectives that people hold. White people hold a narrative, non-white people hold a narrative, African American people hold a narrative, Asian people hold a narrative, women hold a narrative, men hold a narrative, non-binary people hold a narrative. There are so many different narratives being held, and I spoke about this, and one of the skill sets we need is the ability to recognize everybody's walking around with a different narrative in their head, and we need to be cognizant of this and conscious of this and sensitive to this. That's a skill set. We just finished a 3-month-long Enneagram course, trying to figure out how in the world this scoundrel Alex is put together. What are my mental and emotional habits that I bring to the table every time I encounter another scoundrel? It's important to know that about yourself. And you learn about other scoundrels as well. Because how we're conditioned matters, and it's a skill set to understand your conditioning. It's a skill set to understand other people are conditioned. And of course, action science, which I just mentioned, and by the way, that's the next cut at Prescriptions for Building Beloved Community next fall. We're going to dig into action science. Don't assume, inquire. Don't attribute, inquire. So collusion, my friends, collusion is the path to interpersonal perdition. I love that word, perdition. You like that word, perdition? If I wasn't on a time limit this morning, I'd roll on perdition for about 5 minutes. I love the way that rolls off the tongue. You know, Southern preachers, man, they can take a single sentence and turn it into a 45-minute sermon just by inflecting that sentence in different places, you know. Collusion, my friends, is the road to interpersonal perdition. And they just hammer it for like 45 minutes, man. They're very good at that. And love. So love coupled with effective interpersonal skills. This is the path to beloved community. We have to play by different rules of the game. We have to play by different rules of the game if we want beloved community in sacred time and space to be different than it is all the other hours of our week. Okay? So, keep taking the next step in love. Take the next step in love. Keep taking the next breath in love. Take that next breath in love. Keep thinking your next thought in love. Think in love. So let us go our way remembering to make beauty for one another. Yes? And letting love have jurisdiction. So be it. Thank you.
We'll extinguish the chalice and close the service today with the poem Whispers in Silence by David Kitchens. In shadows where the hushed voices fear to tread, bravery listens where judgment might instead. Gentle ears, open hearts, the bravest choice, amidst the clamor to find the softer voice. Quiet strength in holding back the swift decree, in patient silence, understanding's key. In listening, hearts unfold, grow wise and just, where fear is quelled and voices rise from dust.